Well, thank you so much, Katia, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Telling your stories, and I'm sure we're gonna have lots to talk about. So, I guess let's just start at the beginning because that's always a good place to begin.
Yeah.
Law school, what you did before, maybe.
Yeah.
What do did you feel like that shaped how you started things off in law school?
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty standard kind of story. I did liberal arts at Dawson. Didn't know what to do next. Chose history at McGill for no particular reason, and then it was really, and this is kind of funny because I was studying history, but historical events occurred while I was doing my history degree that resulted in me wanting to study law. And those two historical events are the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Oka crisis. But I didn't decide, I'm going to go to law school straight off. I was either going to do a PhD about the father of American Indian policy, join the Foreign Service, or go to law school.
3 options.
Yeah. Anyway, long story short, I didn't do well enough on the Foreign Service exam to even get an interview, but I did do well enough on the LSAT to get into McGill. and then the GRE, right? So to do my super duper PhD at Yale, because that's where the papers were of the father of American Indian law, whose name is Felix Cohen, and whose dad, Morris Cohen, was one of the founders of the New School for Social Research in New York.
Okay, yeah.
So that was his dad. Mm-hmm. So I would have really, 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 really loved to do a PhD about Felix Cohen, but
at the New School?
No, at Yale, because that's where his papers were. In the rare books collection at Yale, his papers were there, and I had it all figured out and whatever. So I was in Berlin, and then I'm like, okay, I'm going to write the GRE in Berlin in November, and then I find out from Yale, like, no, you have to write the GRE in September. We don't accept November marks. And then I just, I was like, oh, shucks, I would have to take a year off. And anyway, long story short, I came back to Montreal, went to Washington, D.C. because Bill Clinton had just gotten elected, and did a stage at the Canadian Embassy to see if I would like the Foreign Service. Mm-hmm. I had a really good time in D.C. It was really fun being there when Bill Clinton had just sort of come into office. It was very hopeful. But I realized that the Foreign Service is not for me. It's like living at camp. Camp is fun, but living at camp might not be so much fun. Anyway.
Yeah.
And then I got my LSAT mark, and that kind of sealed the deal, so off I went to McGill.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So you basically had like a year of a political year, political travel.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
It was really, and I highly recommend that to everyone. Like, always take a year off between things. So I took a year off after high school and lived in Barcelona as an exchange student, and a year off after undergrad.
So, what were some of these jobs that you had while you were in law school?
Well, I had a faculty at McGill who've been around for a long time will remember The Law and You. You've never heard of this?
No.
It was right before the coming into force of the New Civil Code. Okay. We used to call it the New Civil Code. There was a man at the law school whose son had studied at McGill, and the dad, who was a retiree in his 70s, decided that he would do his law degree sort of one course at a time. But being a retired businessman, he saw an opportunity in this civil code business and said, why don't we start doing conferences at McGill Law School on this new code thing, and we'll get practitioners, we'll get judges. They'll come because it's McGill. Who doesn't want to be associated with McGill and teaching on a subject that they have mastered, and specifically on, what's the new code and how does it work and stuff like that. And then, organizing a conference where you have this big lineup of speakers and often 300 attendees, and we would hold these things in the moot court. And some of the professors at the law school were like, what the hell is going on? I was supposed to be teaching constitutional in here at 8:30 this morning, and there's a big sign like, welcome to the Law and You, and oh, by the way, constitutional is upstairs for today. But I did that for 3 years, but it was great. It was really great.
Do you find that experience kind of was like the glue to your legal education? Kind of like helped you piece things together?
Well,
apply it?
you know
was
what?
It useful,
It was, you know, I saw a sign on, you know, in New Chancellor Day Hall when you're going up the stairs and there's always like all this stuff glued to the wall. So there was like, you know, it said job opportunity, whatever, and I was like, job, yes, job, I need a job. and then it said, you know, this thing, and right away I went and I found, it was next door, sort of up the hill, the first building up the hill, and I went to see Richard, and he said, sorry, but the position's already been filled, and I was like, no, this is not possible. And what happened is the guy who had taken the job quickly kind of lost interest, and I was, you know, Richard knew that I wanted it, and he called me back, and the thing is, it was I was working there, and my friend Abdul was working there, Abdul Khan, who now is a partner at Weirfolds in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And that, like Richard and Abdul and Denise and me, this was totally my law school experience. And you have to imagine
sounds like a power team that you had going.
Well, the thing is, we're convening these meetings of advisory committees that would be like, you know, 2 judges from the Court of Appeal, a couple of judges from the Superior Court, and the managing partners from all of the big law firms downtown. And the meeting would be at 7 o'clock in the morning, and breakfast would be served. And then people would chat, you know, because they hadn't seen each other for a while, and they're like, da. And Richard would be like, excuse me, could everybody please stop talking? You know, I said I'd get you out of here by 8, but not if you're talking amongst yourselves. And I'm going, I'm thinking I'm never going to get a job. These people are going to recognize me, and they're going to say, you know.
So is that your first like law job?
Well, and then I just so this is, you know, sort of professional. Yeah. But what happens to people in life is there is also personal. Yeah. And in second year law school, I met my husband, who had just finished his MA in English at McGill. So we'd been going to McGill together for many years, but we had never met. And so we meet, and right away I'm thinking, okay, this is it. I've met this person. This person is who I want to spend my whole life with, and he's about to move back to Toronto. That can't happen. And in fact, we're going to have children, and I want them to learn how to speak French. I think I told him
like
that.
Your thought process.
Yeah, I'd known him for about 3 days, and he's, you know, when I told him that, he said, okay, you're insane, right? But for me, this was all perfectly clear. Like, we have to stay in Montreal. Yeah. Because we're going to have a family, and the only place one has a family is in Montreal. And so then my whole, like, what I would do after law school plan it took like a complete, like, it was an about face, a 180, because I had no plan to ever write a bar exam or become a practicing lawyer.
So is that when you kind of reconsidered the conversation with him?
Yeah, well, and that's when I was like, oh, I guess I should figure out what one does to become a lawyer. So all you have to do is listen to what people are talking about. That's it.
Just like follow.
Do what they do, you know. Just listen to people, and they're like talking about the firms, and you just write down the names that you hear them saying, and then eventually you figure out that if you get an articling position with a big firm, then there's all these other perks, like you can work for them in the summer. So then your whole summer job problem is solved. They'll pay for bar school. Well, there's a big thing that you don't have to pay for anymore. This is why I say to people, you always have to have an open mind, no matter what it is you think you particularly love or particularly stand for or whatever, because when I was at McCarthy's, I worked 14 hours a day learning how to do due diligence, like corporate due diligence, which is basically reading tons of documents trying to figure something out. And what I was trying to figure out was environmental liability. Like, does this company have environmental problems that could be very expensive to solve? Mm-hmm. And, well, when I got hired at NAFTA, my job was investigating environmental law enforcement. Like, is the government enforcing the law? Like, what are they doing, whatever. Well, I learned how to do due diligence at McCarthy's. And in 3 years of working, you know, many, many hours a week, in a very concentrated fashion, by the time I got to NAFTA, where I was doing something that, in terms of my values or whatever, was really up my alley, I was like a nuclear rocket of due diligence. So then when you've been taught how to work that way and you get the opportunity to turn it on something that really matters to you, of course you're going to be in heaven. Like I was in heaven, but I made a lot of people really unhappy. My reports were really long. And then I left and I just didn't really know what I was going to do next. And I'd always told myself I'd never go back into private practice, and I did because a friend convinced me to. So she was at McCarthy's, and their headhunter was desperately looking for somebody for another firm. And I think the way it is in Montreal, there's a limited number of people in every category of practice. So there's a limited number of sort of highly specialized environmental lawyers. So if you have some, you want to keep them. You don't want to get them poached by some other firm that wants to have some too. And so since I was now sort of out there on the market, it was like, well, if somebody needs one, let's take her and stick her in there so that they don't go and poach somebody else's. And Abdul from the Law and You was working at this firm. It was Blake's at the time. And literally when the headhunter called me and she said it's Blake's, and I was like, Blake's? That's Abdul's firm. Literally, the reason I accepted to go was because Abdul was working for them in Toronto. I ended up leaving Blake's after 3.5 years of, like I said, having more fun in terms of the people that I met there than I've ever had in a job ever. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to be a university professor because I had paid off my mortgage. Yeah. So again, like you have your professional life, but you also have your private life. And what you can do in your professional life kind of depends on these like boring things like mortgages. and I didn't have one anymore. So I was like, oh, I could be a university professor.
Well, one of the questions we've been asking everybody is, if you had an hour extra every day, what would you do with it?
Sleep.
Yeah. So that has been one of the answers, and the other one being spend more time with my kids. I spend with my kids.
Yeah, well, see, my kids are old enough, they're 15 and 12, that if I tried to spend more time with them, I think that would be met with...
You'd be cramping their style?
Serious resistance, I mean... when I was working at NAFTA, I worked 9 to 5. That, in a way, that is having it all. But it also depends on your personality and how you feel about things. Other people would say, well, no, because you're away from your kids from 8 until 6. And I'm like, yeah, but that's nothing compared to working at a big firm. Yeah. Like if you're billing 200 hours a month, you are basically not seeing your kids during the week. Being the person who wakes them up in the morning, the person who gets them dressed, the person who prepares their lunches, maybe even brings them to daycare, maybe even, actually always gets home for dinner with the family, that is golden.
Basically, if you're at a coffee house, and it's and you're like networking, and this frazzled, law student starts talking to you, what advice would you give them?
The most important thing, I feel, is to be open to what comes along, professionally, academically, and also in your personal life. Really sort of be open to it. And to knowing that things will turn out probably differently from what you expected, and it's good. It's fine. It's fine. So that way I think you are more likely to get satisfaction, because you'll say to yourself, well, I didn't know what the story was going to be, but it ended up being this, and that's pretty great.
Exactly.
Keeping that open mind for your future, but also for your colleagues and for the school, I think allows you to get the most out of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for chatting today. I mean, I always find talking to you inspiring.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm honored.
Yeah, no, thank you.
And now I literally have to run.
No, I know. I'm sorry.